have such sights to show you.
We're Poppin the Scary horror podcast here. Woo! I'm your host, Coale, and with me, as always, I have my good friend and co-host, Aaron. Aaron, what's happening, bud?
Nothing much.
All
How
right.
are you?
Oh, I'm feeling pretty peppy. Peppy rolly, that is.
Oh, yeah, we're going to eat some peppy rollies. This is
Yeah,
my first time discovering a peppy rollie. I'm excited.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that review after the intro.
It's an abomination of science. Speaking of...
I'm not sure whether that was the best or worst transition, but...
who knows?
Yes, to be determined, but yes, it does correlate with your words in the fact that we're watching Frankenstein, another one of the Universal monster icons. Now, Aaron, I know that with Dracula, you weren't familiar with the original source material of Bram Stoker Dracula. Are you familiar with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein?
This is a funny one, because I'm pretty familiar with the source material. I've never read it, and I've never watched Frankenstein, but I've got all kinds of fun facts just because I was really interested in kind of that era of literature. So, like, I mean, the Edgar Allan Poe kind of era when people were frightened of science. I mean, this was the time when people thought that something like Frankenstein could actually happen because there were real experiments out there that people were shocking toads with lightning and they were seeing their legs move or whatever, and they were like, oh shit, what if we could reanimate corpses? And this is the same time that people were just afraid of getting buried alive and all these grim sort of realities of the 1800s. That's why a lot of just the literature that came out of this time period is just dark and awful and creepy and about death. And so I'm interested to dive into this period, even though I kind of vaguely know the story of Frankenstein itself, but more so I just know like the environment in which it was created in which Mary Shelley, who was married to the poet Percy Shelley, created Frankenstein during what they called the endless summer. I mean, it was the year with no summer, I think, rather, because it was when Mount Tamboro, the volcano exploded, filled the sky with ash, and it was just rainy and dark and cold and miserable for an entire year. I mean, there were days, especially where Mary Shelley was living, where there would be no light for an entire day. It was just an endless night. It's in the winter, so just like a really depressing time to be alive, especially considering in 1800 they didn't know that that's why there was no light and no summer and it was just dark and miserable. They didn't know Mount Tamboro had exploded and shot ash into the atmosphere and made it miserable for everybody. They just knew that, wow, this is a shitty year. So, anyway, all these things come together to create the monster of Frankenstein and the story. I mean, these were real fears that people had at the time, and this was real horror in 1819 or whenever this was written. So, I'm excited to see the old-timey Universal film adaptation of this. I hope it captures some of that initial eerie, macabre.
Yeah, I was just letting you on a roll. I was just like, you're on a streak, you're on fire. I'm not touching that.
Sometimes it intersects with like little portions of literature I'm particularly interested in, so I get on my little soapbox. But
no,
I'll hop off my soapbox because I've never actually read Frankenstein. Probably should have by now. I might after we watch this movie. But...
Well, in fact, you could probably borrow my copy here that I had from school. So I actually read Frankenstein in college for a class. And fortunately for me, I was already well interested in Frankenstein because around the time I had to read the novel Frankenstein, it was like 3 years after I had already watched the Universal picture film Frankenstein there. So I was already interested, but I was very surprised to kind of see that it's kind of a different creature all its own whenever it comes to it. And so there's been like kind of, I don't know, it's like, and I think we'll be able to talk about this more in the adaptation, because I'm not sure how familiar you are with the story of Frankenstein. I know you know the history about it, but just the
I know
actual...
like the bullet points. I know like the story arc from a really zoomed out point, but I don't know like the specific details.
Okay, yeah. Well, it'll definitely be really interesting to dive in, because yeah, whenever it came to my history with Frankenstein as a whole, I mean, it's kind of the same thing as Dracula, where you're a little kid, you know about it, you know, he's like this big green guy, goes, you know, goes around there. And so I was always familiar with that. So whenever I watched the film Frankenstein, it pretty much was a trip. I'm trying to keep from spoiling it there, but basically... it was definitely quite a film watching it there. And so reading the novel also, while it is different from the film, as a heads up, I do find things I appreciate about the film. It's like they both diverge in two different paths, but I respect each of their paths, and I don't think like one is better than the other.
Just tell me this. Does the... Well, I guess you can't. That would be spoiling it. I was going to ask, because I just want to know if it ends the same or not, but I guess you can't tell me that. I guess I'll find out.
Because do you know the ending of Frankenstein?
I know, like, the book ending. I don't...
Okay, the book ending. Yeah, okay. Well, I will keep tight-lipped on that, because that is also another thing that I could talk extensively about, is the endings of each film. Because with the way the film ends versus how the book ends, I have my own thoughts and feelings about each of them. And it's really... I'm really excited about this episode. It's really going to be an interesting dive, because you have the... literary backbone there to bring to the table, while I have more so kind of the pop culture and a little bit of literary this time round to kind of contribute with Frankenstein.
You literally handed me the book.
Yes,
I'm looking at it, and it's first page. They have the initial first page from the old 1818 edition. It says Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, and I love this. I just want to bring it up. It has a quote from Paradise Lost, which is Milton, you know, which is also an eerie, weird take on like creation, and like the Adam and Eve story, but mostly of Satan and how he was actually the good guy. You know, a really weird epic to write way back in the day. So that's awesome that it starts with that epic poetry, and of course she'd be a Milton fan because she's married to the poet Percy Shelley, that was like Milton. You could argue is like the original romantic, and Shelley was one of the romantics. So
well, this is going to be
lots of good context.
Yep, lots of good stuff to look forward to. So our pepperonis are getting cold.
Yeah,
so
that's true. We gotta dive in.
I know. We'll be right back after we watch Frankenstein.
It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. Oh, in the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be God.
And we are back from being pepperolied and watching Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, reviews on both.
Pepperoli. Interesting concept. You know, you kind of told me it was like a cinnamon roll with like pepperoni, and so in my mind there was a cinnamon involved in the mix. But I see what you're saying. It's just like pepperoni dough in the shape of a cinnamon roll.
Yes.
Good concept. Yeah, I'm always looking for a new twist on the classic tale. And that's kind of what we got on the monster movie too.
You know dang! Look at that transition. That was smooth as butter there.
Oh, yeah. As smooth as my poop is going to leave my body after eating all those pepper rolls.
Oh, my God, Aaron. All right, so Frankenstein.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, there's a lot of a lot of the Frankenstein pop culture that I come to understand. You know, big bolts in the neck, lumbering Frankenstein monster, and torches and fire, and you know, Germany. Yeah, dark and brooding and stormy, and no, it's a vibe. I love it. It was definitely a little more like, I guess, a little more violent than Dracula, which we just watched, but still like really, really tame by today's standards. But yeah, no, I loved it. It was eerie and you know, science fiction-y, and yeah.
I completely agree with all those, which makes it hard to believe because here's the interesting thing I'll get into is the fact that Frankenstein was also released in 1931.
The movie.
Yeah, the movie. So they were both released in the same year, but yet they feel drastically different.
Yeah, they do. This one does feel like even just, I mean, a lot of the special effects and stuff are cheesy, but even just in like the effects department and stuff, it just seems better made, better quality.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and that's why I consider myself very fortunate that this was the first Universal monster movie I ever saw, because again, I got those 2 VHS tapes and I'm just like, oh, I'm curious, I'll watch, Frankenstein, and it just blew me away the first time watching it. And again, just, popping that cassette in and just watching it on my TV, I was just still blown away in 2011 whenever I first watched this movie, just getting to experience it. And I can safely say, watching it now on the newly released 4K disc they came out with, I felt like it just felt like I'm experiencing it all over again there. And I mean, I'm pretty much on the same boat as you. Like, I just was enthralled. I was worried a little bit at the beginning at certain portions there where, it's kind of setting up the pieces a little bit. I'm just like, okay, hopefully it's not that slow. But like, once it gets to the lab, things start speeding up immensely.
Yeah,
I
do think the pacing's pretty good throughout.
It really is.
Definitely some lulls, but yeah, for a movie, especially like an old 1930s movie, where they don't have as much, tech and experience to sort of fill the gaps in some of these things like they do nowadays. It really doesn't ever get boring.
No. And, with the plot especially, which I'll go ahead and explain now, basically follows Dr. Henry Frankenstein, who is out gathering a whole bunch of body parts for his experiment because, as his previous professor had told both his fiancée and his close friend, that he had an obsession with life, therefore started dedicating all his work, time, and effort into recreating life. And so pretty much that's his whole goal. And then once he accomplishes it, he starts to kind of see the consequences of messing with such a power. And, I think plot-wise, again, it's one of those things that it's pretty much following in the exact steps somewhat as the novel, where, Dr. Victor Frankenstein in a book, that's one of the changes they've made, is in the movie he's named Henry, but in the book his name is Victor. That was pretty much both their goals in mind, is like, ooh, I really want to discover life. But the interesting thing is the fact that, and we'll get to this with characters, but the characters in the novel versus the movie are 2 different beings there. And it's not like one of those things like, oh yeah, they're following it to the book there, which is why it's not surprising that they've released other Frankenstein films that have hearkened more to the novel as opposed to this interpretation James Whale decided to do. But it's one of those things that even though they're different, they're strong in their own way and help deliver the story as they need to. And I think just the whole idea, kind of like you mentioned, Aaron, just the fact that Mary Shelley was like up in the mountains there, just in darkness, and just, again, being like very curious about the sciences that they couldn't quite understand as to what this could possibly mean for the future. I think it's just an amazing plot. Like, just follows through of a man who, is basically obsessed with one thing and then has to deal with the consequences of what comes afterwards.
Yeah, and it's very, I mean, we mentioned she was married to one of the Romantic poets, Shelley, as you probably know him, Percy Shelley. A lot of the concepts that this grapples with really is, in the same vein of like, sort of, talking about God and like the reaching beyond. This guy was trying to become God and create life, and he realizes his flaw, mistake. I mean, it's no surprise that it opens with a quote from Milton about, creation. because from Paradise Lost, which that whole epic poem is about, the fall of Lucifer from heaven and then having to scratch his way out on earth and in hell. It's like it has that sort of vibe of Dr. Frankenstein trying to reach beyond and discover something and go far and then realize why that's dangerous and have it backfire on him.
I think one of the most interesting things, especially because it being 11 years since I watched it the first time, is noticing, kind of like you mentioned earlier, is how much more violent and provocative this film is, which it's
for the 30s too.
Exactly. And in fact, there's actually one quote, which again, I feel like I don't have to worry about too much of spoilers because everyone knows kind of Frankenstein and the tale behind it, and the fact that he resurrects this creation here. But the line whenever he says it's alive, it's alive, it's alive, he says, his friend goes, Henry, in the name of God. And Henry goes, oh, in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God. That was such a provocative, controversial line that they actually removed it initially. And overblurred it with thunder because they were just like, oh my gosh, that is such a blasphemous thing to say there, just to again be playing God like that, which fortunately they had the courtesy to re-add it in future releases and restored it to back how it was. But
this is the time where you couldn't have a man and a woman lay in the same bed on screen, you know what I mean? The first toilet didn't show up on screen for another 3 decades. I mean,
I just feel like with this film, there's a lot more freedom that's given to it than I feel like Dracula was given there. And not to say that, the restrictions of Dracula hindered it massively, but it did hinder it just a small bit, as opposed to this one, it just felt like it could do whatever.
Right. And there's definitely some signs of they cut away at parts where they probably wouldn't in a modern version, somebody's getting choked and then it just kind of cuts to them being on the ground or whatever, whereas they might in a modern version explore that violence a little more thoroughly. But that being said, I mean, a lot of people get choked and beat up and stuff in this film, and it's they show a good portion compared to something like Dracula. Yeah,
and I feel like, just like you mentioned, I feel like the pacing, it does have a couple of moments where it is a bit of a lull, but it's very brief. I feel like it doesn't hinder on it for too long. And that's kind of one of the interesting things, because we talked about in Dracula how there was a lack of music throughout the film, and it felt present. But in this film, there was a lack of music, but I never felt like it was just empty space.
Right, because they filled it with other elements of sound design. There was rain and crowds and yelling and wedding bells and everything else.
And that allowed moments to where whenever they don't have any sound or noise, it's supposed to be that way because you're just focusing on the intensity of a scene or anything like that. But I feel like, again, sound department is just way more well constructed, I feel like, throughout this film there. And so it helps the pacing immensely. That's the only reason why I mentioned kind of the sound design coming into it there. And with the cast of characters playing into this plot, I feel like they're a lot more stronger than the previous film. They're very more defined there. Now, obviously, I'm not going to pretend there's there's so much depth to each character, but you definitely feel like they are more well defined than just kind of pieces there to help the plot.
And they're all very well acted too.
Yes.
I don't think anybody's really phoning it in. There's maybe one or two characters that are a little straight-laced normal people, but so you can't really give those people a lot of spunk or whatever or flair. But even considering those sorts of parts, I mean, a lot of just really well performed too. Yeah,
and I feel like and it's actually kind of funny because some of the actors are from Dracula. I don't know if you noticed that.
I just figured everybody in the 1930s looked the same.
No, it's no worries at all, and we'll definitely get to them. But I do have to mention one of the strongest performances in the film, and the one that just I never get tired of. It just never gets old. It's perfected. Is Colin Clive's performance as Henry Frankenstein?
Yeah, he does really well.
He does super well, especially just being the more obsessed and manic, scientist there whenever he's just in the fray of it and everything. And whenever he speaks with such intensity
Right.
and confidence. And it's just so like mesmerizing. Like you just can't turn away. Kind of like in the same way that Dwight Fry did his performance and just speaking about just the creepy things whenever he had to make that character change. I feel like this one is that, times 11. I just
Right.
feel like this is the definitive. Whenever I think of, Dr. Frankenstein, I think of him
Yeah.
there and other stuff there. And I feel like I'd be really surprised to see any performance top his in that
Right.
regard. Like they could get close, but this is just, it blew me away the first time watching it, and just how many mood swings he has to do. And then the fact that we get to see him act more normal whenever he's like
Right.
more collected and calm. And I really liked that a lot, because
Yeah.
it's not just one note, I'm crazy scientist there.
And that's a good point. He has a difficult job as an actor, which is to constantly like be towing a line of like to be convincing both as the mad scientist and as the normal guy that's just really invested into a project, and to do those simultaneously, you know what I mean? So you can see why people would be like, you're crazy, but you can also see, well, he's on the breakthrough of something big here. I mean, and to do that both at the same, because I feel like it's easy to be like, "Wah, ha, ha, mad scientist," and it's also easy to be like, I'm doing my work, but to merge those together constantly and to be flip flopping in the middle of a scene, it's it takes a lot of talent.
No, I mean, and I think you pretty much took the words out of my mouth of what I was going to say, because one of the other things that I'll talk more about is that the script, I feel like, is strong. Like the dialogue, it just hits home there, and it's just unbelievably crazy, especially because one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie is whenever he succeeds in creating the creature there, that he's questioned by his former professor there, and he goes into this big philosophical speech there, and just talking about pursuing it, and him just being confused as like, why is he the one called crazy whenever he's looking at the bigger picture and everything.
Right.
And I feel like that's just, again, it's not even just like one of those things like, okay, he's just a crazy scientist there. No, he's deeply passionate and philosophical there, to the point of being manic. And so I think that's just, again, he's just has a killing performance. Like I'm just speechless even talking about it,
Right.
just with how perfectly he played it there. And we could probably talk more about like the moments of each scene beat to beat whenever we're dissecting this film more, but just as is, I feel like his performance is just out of the park, 10 out of 10, zero issues with there. And I feel like, of course, the other performance that, I think we both have to give credit to is Boris Karloff playing the monster.
Yeah.
I feel like for him getting this role, he was given not a lot and elevated it to a high degree there. Because, interesting fact, initially whenever they were getting ready for Frankenstein, they wanted Bela Lugosi to play the monster. And Bela turned it down because he's like, I don't get to talk there. There's nothing for me to do there. And so then Boris Karloff took the place, and in all honesty, skyrocketed to fame, to where there's kind of even a slight feud between Bela and Boris, just because Bela was just kind of jealous. He's like, why is everyone praising him? I elevated my role to this level here. He just did nothing and stumbled around there. So it's very interesting to see that, because again, I feel like Boris Karloff could have easily just been there to do his job, but somehow he channels the idea of being this, newly created creature. And, there's a reason everybody, whenever they think about, Frankenstein's monster, or Frankenstein as they call it there, I used to be nitpicky about it, but as I've gotten older, I've just kind of let that battle go. It's just whatever. Everyone knows what they're talking about. Whenever they think of the Frankenstein monster, they think of Boris Karloff, going, "Rrr, rrr." I mean, that's the staple. That's what they think of. And as opposed to the novel there, which I don't know if you know how the creature is in the novel there, but he's a lot more human.
Yeah, he like talks and stuff, right? In the novel, yeah.
Yeah, he talks and he's just very more philosophical, which I think allows Mary Shelley, whenever she writes it, to kind of give her perspective on her view of life and everything there. Because she was very, very philosophical and deep thinking as an individual there. So I think she kind of used the monster as another foil to Dr. Frankenstein there in the novel. And while this one, I think they just went down with the decision because, again, it's like at the time, they're just like, okay, we need like universal monster there, you know, let's make him more of a creature. But also at the same point, he's not just some lumbering oaf going around just causing havoc and destruction, because they do add that humanity to him as well.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing I find really interesting there, because there are like small moments, even at the very beginning, where you do see him just trying to come to grasp with stuff he's coming into contact with there.
Right.
And also having to face the world, both in the beautiful side and the ugly side all at the same time. And so I think Boris is able just to elevate it. Again, he can't talk at all, you know, can't speak with words there, only grunts in his expression, and he has loads of makeup on. Loads and loads of makeup on, so that's another thing he has to get through, but he just elevates it there. And so that's why it's like whenever you first see him in the film, I do admit they really did ham it up and build up to like, all right, here it is, here it is, boom, there's the creature
Right.
there. But I still can't get enough of it, just that first reveal. And so sorry, I was raving on and didn't realize
No.
I was on a hot streak there. But yeah, needless to say, another 10 out of 10 performance, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's one of those things where, you know, I feel like a lot of people get the sort of, you know, silhouette image of Frankenstein, if you will. It's like, okay, he's the guy, he holds his arms out, he goes, ooh.
Yes.
You know? And yeah, I mean, there's some of that. But if you watching that, I was just impressed with the complexity he was able to put in, you know, at a time when it's, you know, acting wasn't quite the craft it is today, to be able to, like, yeah, he does some lumbering, ooh, you know, moaning and doing some stiff movements and reacting to light and stuff. But you really do see him evolve, you know, where he is kind of really simple-minded when he's first created, and you see him become more complicated even without being able to speak. You see him, you know, kind of overcome some fears. You see him kind of react to things differently, and honestly, you see him kind of get traumatized, and like and so he becomes, you know, one of the most human characters in the story, which I think is an irony that's intentional, where they grant him a lot of humanity despite the fact that everybody else is calling him a monster, you know.
Yeah, I think it's definitely good, because this easily could have just been good versus evil kind of thing there, and I think if they had gone that route, it would have been less effective.
Yeah, it's not very black and white, because Frankenstein's monster does some monstrous things. He does some awful things, but like, you as the viewer get the privilege of knowing, like, okay, I get why he's doing these things. And so he's not, you know, Frankenstein's monster isn't like a great guy, but he's also not a bad guy either. So
yeah, it just definitely is one of those things that he's put into a situation there, and his actions, you know, be it good or bad, you understand where he's coming from. And so I think that's a hard role to be given, but Boris Karloff, I think, just shot off and just cemented it as just another great performance in the film there. And as for the rest of the cast, the bars are set pretty high for them, so I don't feel like any of the other performances jump over those, but again, that's kind of understandable whenever they just hit it out of the park. But I feel like the rest of the cast is still pretty strong. I would say the love interest, Elizabeth, is a lot more endearing to me as the audience than the previous love interest in Dracula there, which again, she wasn't even in so much Elizabeth wasn't in so much peril as the previous love interest, because the love interest in Dracula was constantly being pursued by Dracula there. But with Elizabeth, I felt like she kind of went through more emotional turmoil there as opposed to physical, because again, she's supposed to be marrying Dr. Frankenstein, but he's been so obsessed that he's just pushing away everything in his life in that moment just because he's so obsessed. And you understand people's obsession, like in the fact that they're like, oh, is he coming out? No, he's still playing World of Warcraft there. Just like that kind of level up obsession. And so kind of seeing her go through that emotional turmoil and her concern for his well-being, you feel for her a bit. And again, she's not given a lot in the script there, but I feel like, performance-wise, she's able to do a lot. And whenever you do hear Mae Clark speak with her lines, she does speak it with such endearing words and a sense of care there. And so you do sympathize with her, which I think is good.
Right,
I think it's good because definitely if the other supporting characters' performances weren't as strong, I don't think this film would be as strong as it is there. And so I feel like, again, I do like how we kind of see from her perspective of like, man, I'm really worried about Henry. He's just hasn't been himself, and worrying about it. And then whenever she has to take care of him, you also just get that piece of moment and that connection that they have between them,
right?
Which I think is also important there. I will say, unfortunately, one of the weaker performances I've noticed was the best man, Victor.
Yeah, he's kind of, he's a little flat. But...
Yeah, a little flat, but definitely not as flat as John from Dracula, because I feel like there is a little bit of a weird dynamic between him and Elizabeth there, like a love triangle almost there. And so, and it's very subtle and light, like, just like, oh man, I wish he treats you right, sort of thing there. But he's also like, the best man at Henry's wedding. So there's also that friendship there. So it's a very interesting dynamic. I just don't think it's ever fully developed. Like it only develops a little bit there, but for the most part, he does his role just fine. I feel like, I don't feel like if he was omitted from the film would be better off. I feel like it would be weaker because you need kind of that extra set of hands there, just kind of both paying attention to Elizabeth's side, but also paying attention to Henry's side there. So I feel like no diss to John Bowles, but I feel like he just wasn't given enough in the script and couldn't elevate it above what he was given there. And one of the familiar faces that we do see is Dr. Waldman, played by Edward Van Sloan, a.k.a. Van Helsing in Dracula. And so I thought his role was pretty interesting. Again, performance-wise, I feel like he plays it pretty straight. He does change it up a little bit from Van Helsing a little bit there, but he's still very much like an academic and a scholar there, and he kind of helps set up the pieces of like, oh yeah, Henry hasn't been here for a while. He wanted bodies and we refused to give it to him, so he went out just to do his own experiments there. And he's kind of the voice of reason for Henry's like manic state there. And he's just like, do you really think you should be toiling with this there? Because, the others, they kind of go to him and they're like, oh, you're crazy, for doing it. But, with the professor coming in, he has to kind of be like, do you really think this is a good idea? And speak to him both on an academic and a philosophical level, which again adds interesting conversation there. But you also feel like, he has to admire Henry in a sense because he did pull up something that was a great accomplishment. Now, whether that was right or wrong, to be determined there. But I think he does respect that he is also a scientist, but also has to kind of pull him back down.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the character he plays, you could compare it really closely to the character he plays in Dracula, but like their stances on science are like total opposite. You know what I mean? Like Dracula guy's like, hey, like this is vampires and shit, and people are like, are you sure it's vampires and shit? He's like, it's vampires, and I got vampire curse. This guy, he's like, yeah, reanimating the dead sounds sussy. Don't do that. And so like he has to be the voice of reason, which is interesting. But I had a point and I just lost it. Never mind.
No,
Forgive me.
You're good.
Kill me and bring me back.
But yeah, no worries. If it comes up, just let me know. Interrupt me there. I feel like even though his performance isn't like groundbreaking and strong, again, he's another important pillar and does his job very well and believable. So that way, you know, you feel like he was a former mentor to Henry there.
Right.
And is trying to reconcile there and trying to meet him halfway. Because he could have easily just been constantly berating him like, you know, you're a monster. And he does a bit. He's just saying like, I think what you did is really, really bad. But he tries to meet him from like eye to eye.
And what I was gonna say, yeah, not only is there that parody there of like they're both academics, and so like other people might call them monsters, but he just doesn't understand. Well, this guy understands the science and everything, and he's like, no, you're still doing something messed up. But what's important to remember is like in this time, not only just in the time of when Mary Shelley was writing this novel in 1818, but also in the actual time that this movie came out, like scientific ethics were like not a thing, you know what I mean? Like it was like people had morals, don't get me wrong, people have always had morals, but like there wasn't like you know, a board of scientific ethics that kept people from doing shit like this, like really until like I don't know, after the Nazis did all their shit, like oh hey, that was fucked up. No, we can't do that anymore. And really, it's evolved. I mean, there's been messed up experiments, you know, all the time, and even just I can think of several in the 70s even that were just like completely fucked up. That were things that you know, that by today's ethical standards you can't do. You can't be a professor and do that, you know what I mean? So not only was it, you know, he was no longer at the college and he was shunned for, you know, getting bodies and stuff, but like that was perfectly within the realm of like things that someone would do in the 1800s, you know, like somebody could probably try this. Not that this is based on a true story or anything, but it was based off of popular science fiction of the time. So
yeah, I would definitely agree. It's just very controversial with its ethics there, and I feel like again it just matches the whole tone of the movie perfectly. And I feel like, you know, again, like you and I, we've seen a lot of like gratuitous stuff in films there, be it like violence or shocking or anything like that. But again, I will stand by the point, for 1931, this film is truly shocking, which is why I can understand why they added that warning at the beginning of the film.
There's like a disclaimer with a dude who stands up and he's like, what you're about to see will scare your little shit pants off. Except for he says it in like 1930s speak.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so, of course, like whenever I watched it the first time, I laugh because I'm like, oh, this isn't shocking. But if I just take it to the consideration of the era and everything it's implying, it is insane that they were able to make this film. And so I think again, because they were able to do so much and again get so philosophical with their talk there, I think again it's just really, really good stuff there. So again, massive kudos to Edward Van Sloan for taking up the doctor role once again, just more so on the side of science as opposed to the supernatural.
The side character I like was the Baron.
Yes, Baron Frankenstein, played by Frederick Kerr. It's so funny because the first time I watched it, I just always like, okay, he's the dad, you know, whatever. But it's just the small things he does and just how he is such a dad.
Yeah, he's just the quirky dad, you know. He's like, oh, wow, my son, and I know what's best, and I'm going to make dad jokes all the time.
Yeah, and it's just so funny because he's so grumpy about the whole thing because the wedding's being put off because Henry is focusing on his experiments there, and then he's like, you know what the experiments are? A woman. And I'm going to find her.
I'll show him experiments. Experiment in the bedroom, you fool.
And again, that's just another kind of small role that is heightened because he is kind of the comedic relief there, intentionally comedic relief. There's definitely some goofy moments a lot of the characters do that is pretty funny, but they're unintentional. But that's one that he is very funny, and again, also surprisingly is a character that is well used in the film. You don't feel like he's just there to like, oh, I'm here to tell a joke and then waddle out there, because again, he's just like, nope, I've had it. I'm grabbing Henry. This is ridiculous. This has been dragged on for too long, because he's really excited about this wedding coming up and the fact that he's finally settling down. And so he's like he's making damn sure his son's gonna get married.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, yeah, in a lot of horror movies, I mean, if you just think of the comic relief character in any popular horror movie that pops in your head, they're usually just like some sidekick that's along for the ride. They don't really have agency with the story or the plot or anything. They're just the guy that's like, hey, goofy remark, and then they get stabbed or whatever. Yeah, I mean, he kind of guides the story. He brings people places. He's one of the most powerful men in town, and he's like, yeah, no, this is happening. We're doing the wedding now, and I'm gonna go get my son, and but he's like funny the whole time.
Yeah, so I thought he was a fun inclusion, and one that I've come to appreciate more with subsequent rewatches. There, just whenever you get the little like more nuanced things and the things that aren't obviously like in your face there. So I really loved his character as well. I thought he was a great character, super fun to watch, and again, just helped the story along. And finally, I'll probably mention this because there are a lot of actors in this film. That's another thing that's surprising, just like huge crowds and everything there.
Yeah.
But we're starting to get towards the like, there's a few characters that you see like pop up a couple of times there, like the burgomaster there, like the mayor of the town, Lionel Belmore, which I feel like he's given like 3 minutes of screen time, something like that there.
Maybe even a little less.
Yeah, a little less there. But again, he just does his job fine because he's supposed to be like the mayor of the town.
And he's a good example of like what you do with a character that's just an annoying dip. You give him less than 3 minutes of screen time. And he's also introduced by the other comedic relief character who's kind of a dip, being like, this guy's fucking worthless. And then he walks in, he's like, hey, how you doing?
Yeah, so like no diss to Lionel Belmore who played him. He did his job well. He did what he needed to. It's just, again, just for the sake of the story, he just wasn't given a lot of time to shine there.
Bit of a stooge.
But I will mention one of the final characters that does play a bigger role was also in the previous film, and I honestly didn't realize it was the same actor until today.
Are you talking about Fritz?
Yeah, Fritz.
Who was he in Dracula?
He was Renfield.
Really?
Yes, Dwight Fry. Yes.
Okay.
Well, that makes me feel better.
I did not recognize him.
Because he looks and acts different, which again is just major kudos to Dwight Fry, who again was just able just to really play his performance. Because again, and the interesting thing is that his character's name is Fritz, as opposed to Igor, as you're probably used to hearing a lot of the time.
I was expecting him to be Igor. I was like, is there going to be Igor in this movie? And I was wondering that because like that assistant character doesn't exist at all in the book, right? Yeah.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope, he does not. It was made specifically for this movie here, so it kind of begs the question of where Igor comes into play. And so a lot of people think it comes from the third film, Son of Frankenstein, that they made, because there's a character introduced as Igor, played by Bela Lugosi.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's potentially a film that we'll see in the future there, hopefully. So that'd be a fun one.
Because I haven't seen any of the like official Frankenstein movies or anything, but I've seen the Mel Brooks movie, Young Frankenstein.
Young Frankenstein. Yeah, and that's a really fun movie. That's probably my favorite Mel Brooks movie. But it also has a lot of allusions to at the very least, the first 3 Frankenstein films there. So it's very interesting that was kind of your first Frankenstein.
Yeah, so that's like when I think of Igor, that's the Igor I think of, because I saw that probably when I was in high school. But
I mean, to be fair, he does a great job in that film. Pronounce Igor.
Igor.
Yeah, so that's another film I can ramble on and on about there, but I'll try to stick to just this film solely. So with Fritz, I feel like, again, it's one of those things that Dwight does his job very well, but I don't think the script gave him as much to work with as opposed to Dracula, where he's given so much stuff to do and say and work with and just really sell it. And so again, he doesn't like undersell it, but my biggest issue is the fact that they just, well, I say it's the biggest issue, but then I start thinking about it on a deep level, is the fact that, he's pretty subservient to Dr. Frankenstein, makes sense and everything. But whenever it comes to him interacting with the monster, he himself becomes a monster there.
I love Fritz's character, and just knowing that he's not involved in the novel is crazy to me, just because of how pivotal I feel like he plays a part that he plays in this. I guess we could probably go more into about this in spoilers, but yeah, just the way he treats the monster.
And that was the interesting thing is like at first I look at it and I'm like, oh well, he seems pretty one note. But then if you think about it on a deeper level, like, you know, you just dig in, then you start to realize, oh, there's a lot more to this role than meets the eye.
He's a servant of, you know, and he sort of views very highly Dr. Frankenstein, and he's given a purpose from Dr. Frankenstein, and then he creates this being that's his new baby. And so, of course, there's a little bit of jealousy, but then there's also like, oh, he doesn't even talk, I'm better than him, you know, and so he's beating him, and he feels you know, like he's higher in the pecking order, and he wants to cement that. But just that very attitude and just childish nature just ensures to the audience that he is lower than this dead body that was animated. You know.
Man, those are other good points I didn't even think of. I have my own thoughts whenever it comes to it there, but it's like one of those mixed things that I feel like, again, like when it comes to the purpose of Fritz, I feel like it's ingenious and done well. It's just one of those things that, you know, it's just weird seeing Dwight come from this role where he was just like literally eating up the scene and just he was the MVP of that film, just to kind of almost be to the background in this one. And so it's just such a strange dynamic, and I feel like Dwight does the character well because again, it's just a subservient thing, not the smartest tool in the shed by any means of the word there.
I think he did really well. I really liked all the scenes that he was like a focal part of, and I feel like he pulled it off with it. He wasn't trying to ham it up as much as he was in Dracula,
and I think that definitely would have made a lot of the scenes a lot more goofy and as opposed to intense there. So I'm glad he did reel it back, which again probably just shows his acting chops there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm used to like Igor, who like is sort of the goofy idea of the assistant. And so I actually really like Fritz because that's kind of what I expected going in, and I was pleasantly surprised that he was like he was a regular character who was obviously, you know, he's strange by comparison because he's disabled, but he doesn't do the representation of a disabled character a disservice, which I would have thought, you know, like he would be the butt of the joke because it's a movie about it and he's like the disabled assistant in the 30s, but no, I mean he's like a real character with real thoughts and a complicated emotions. And I thought it was cool though.
Yeah, and also he busted his buns getting them body parts there. He had to crawl everywhere. And the thing I do like is the fact that also whenever it came to the heavy labor, a lot of it did fall on Fritz to complete there, but Henry also was willing to get down and dirty there because whenever they steal that first body, which that's one heck of an opening. That's one thing I have to talk about is like the way this film opens with the funeral and then them leaving, and then once the gravedigger is finishing, you know, just smoothing the soil over the plot there, that Henry and Fritz move in to start digging the body there. And again, it's just such a strong image.
It really sets the scene for the whole movie, not just plot-wise, obviously, they got to get the body parts. Not just thematically, because yes, it's dark and drooling, and it's, you know, there's rain coming down and everything, but also, like, it sets the primary motif of, like, a funeral is very much like a sending a body to God, like a you know, we're expanding the barrier. It's a you know, it's a sort of, it's not only a ceremony about death, but it's about afterlife, you know what I mean, to put them in a coffin and to say the prayers, and there's all this religious iconography in the graveyard with crosses and gravestones and such, and to have that sort of be the beginning for this journey of a guy who's trying to, you know, become God, defy God, however you want to put it, I think is just really appropriate without you know, banging you over the head with it.
Holy cow, I'm really glad to have you on this podcast. God dang, because you just elevated it above even more, and it helps me kind of add my pieces, because and that's one thing I'll talk about, but another thing, I love the set pieces. The set pieces are gorgeous, where I feel like Dracula, you know, there's a couple good set pieces. I feel like all these set pieces are amazing in Frankenstein. And so in that grave scene, whenever they're digging, I love the ominous statue in the background of the Grim Reaper there, which again, you're talking about sending to heaven there. And again, like, Henry's whole view that you hear him speak throughout the film is like, the body's not dead. It is merely resting. It has not lived life yet. And so, again, I just love the way that he just constantly says that. He just never refers to it because
Like
he's
in his mind, he's intercepting the body in the pathway from this Earth to the next. You know what I mean? He doesn't really reference it as alive until he shocks it with lightning, and then he's like, "It's alive, it's alive." But he's really careful to correct everybody. It's not dead. You know?
Yeah, merely resting there. And I just love, again, just how shocking, because you have Henry go like breaking his, well, I wouldn't say breaking his own morals. You don't know where his morals lie, but him just breaking moral boundaries, I will say, because he's digging up graves of people that were just buried, also grabbing bodies of people who were hung there. And so going through, and not only that, but going in to steal a brain from his school that he attended. And so it's just like how much he's willing to cross lines of boundaries just to complete his goal there. Because again, whenever you get obsessed about something, you tend to get tunnel vision and just ignore anything. You're like, no matter what the cost, I'm gonna make this happen here. And so I think it just helps really, again, establish the whole tone and mood of the film. And I think it's just one hell of a mood for that, for sure.
Right.
But I'm really struggling to not talk more about the plot because I don't want to spoil it. So I'll again talk about like the settings there. I thought all of the settings were interesting, from the like little castle tower that Henry is staying at, conducting all of his experiments there.
Well, the abandoned windmill is what it is. Yeah. I love that. Just the insides, like the guts of the windmill that they're constantly in. You see the stone and the wood pieces, and later on you get to see the actual mill and like a actually pretty pivotal scene. You get to see the gears, the insides of what turns the mill. And so I love that little building there.
And I don't think I realized it. Was it the same building or two different buildings?
No, it was the same building. Even the Baron is like, what's he doing up there in that abandoned windmill when he had such a perfectly nice home, and blah.
That's so funny. I never realized it because we never get to see like the fan part.
Yeah, they don't show it till the very till the end where they actually show the windmill. You know what I mean? But all that stuff in the beginning is in that same structure, and you can tell because whenever they enter the windmill again, there's a part with the monster, and he passes by that room that he was locked in, and he's like, and then he goes back up.
Yeah, it's funny. I never noticed it was the same building. I always assumed that it was just two different buildings there, but it wouldn't make sense because they were both in the mountains there. So yeah, that lines up. So the more you know about that. But yeah, and there's just so much great stuff to it. Again, because we even mentioned seeing the gears of the windmill later on there. We'll talk more about it in the spoilers for sure, but it just allows for great set pieces. Even the more mundane set pieces feel more grand in scope because again, you're at Baron Frankenstein's house, which is a mansion, and it's well decorated there, and it felt like it had a lot of history and character to it, as opposed to the sanatorium residence they were staying at, which again, it looked nice, but it was more pale by comparison, which is why it always shocks me that this was in the same year as Dracula there.
Well, this just seems so much more so much more care and time and effort went into it compared to Dracula. I don't know that that's the truth, but that's just how it appears to me. That this seems much more like a finished product, whereas, we talked with Dracula, and it sounds like there's just large portions that are silent and stuff. Like they hadn't, it was a first draft they put out, but this feels like, something they really worked on, and this is the perfect version we can send out.
Yeah, I think James Whale had a lot to do with how detailed and well polished this whole film was, because he was very passionate about the story he wanted to tell.
Right.
And so again, just seeing kind of these set pieces, even just the outside settings and the village itself and how bustling it is, it's just
cute German village.
So good. It's just so good, and you just eat up the scenery, and I feel there's never a moment where I'm oh no, okay, this is fine. I felt like every setting was appropriately created. And that also leads me to another thing that I love about this film the lighting. The lighting is so well implemented there, and just allows for great shadow angles there, whether it's the monster casting it inside the building there. Again, whenever they're trying to see how the monster reacts to sunlight and everything, just so many lights casting shadows throughout the whole laboratory and everything there.
And that's pretty crucial to the story too. I mean, even whenever he's creating the monster at the beginning, he's saying to the professor, like, you taught me about ultraviolet and microwave lights or whatever, but I discovered a new ray, you know. And so like the whole I mean, light is pretty central to the monster and how it was created in the first place, which of course light is also, you know, often correlated with the presence of God or whatever, holy light and stuff. So you know, it's those really subtle things that you can sort of dig into and go like, oh, I see what they were doing there. But it's not something you have to, you know, it's not something they spend all day pontificating about and you know, giving you all this exposition. But you know, it's really cool that that's one of the first scenes with the monster is like being shown the light of God or whatever, being shown this intensity and him being like, ooh, you know, you need reaching up towards it, you know, and then they shut it off from him, like no more light for you.
Yeah, it's just it's so well done. Like I just love how they took the care with a lot of these. I guess you would call them like effects there, but like the lighting is just perfect, and the special effects. You know, it is minimal, but a lot of them, aside from a few instances, there are pretty well done. I would say. I especially love the lab equipment. How it's like all this electricity, which is probably was very new at the time there. So I'm sure it even shocked audiences watching, you know, the technology go up, which now we kind of grew up, you know, we all had that lamp where it looked like electricity was inside the ball and you place your hand there. But like at the time, it's just like groundbreaking and mesmerizing there. So I imagine that whole scene was like kind of crazy, but I found a lot more interest in a lot of the lesser scenes. Cause like, for instance, whenever Elizabeth and Victor and the doctor are going to see Henry, you know, they're knocking at the door, it's pouring down rain, and it pans up to the window, and you see Henry there, but it's not like one of those things where they could have easily just created like a facade there, but again, they like blended in and kind of do like a green screen effect through the window there and just have it cast through there, because again, it probably was a lot cheaper than actually building a huge set piece to do that. They also did the same thing whenever they're showing Fritz trying to prepare for like the storm about to happen, and he's on top of the structure there, and you know, unfortunately, this is like one of those things, like with older copies I never noticed this, but with the 4K I saw like the little like rectangle where they added the green screen so they could add Fritz working on it there. But
there's like in one of the chase scenes at the end, you could tell that they're like the background is a big curtain. You can see the wrinkles in it. Which I imagine is probably just because we're watching the 4K and probably original audiences might not been able to tell the wrinkles in the curtain. But
just like with how, like, you know, not as pristine as quality is. So it's definitely kind of like the problem with 4K is that I love that we're able to get this clean of a copy, but it also does show a lot more of the strings, if you will, of this film. But it doesn't hurt it for me in the slightest, because a lot of times whenever you do notice stuff, it's usually during the climax. There's only really one specific effect I can think of towards the end of the film that is pretty laughable.
It involves a fall.
Yes.
That's
that one
I was thinking too.
Yeah, but even like, and it does pull you out a little bit, but even then it's like so quick and just, you know, there and gone.
Yeah, and I could nitpick stuff about that too. Like I could, because that there is a couple moments like that, specifically involving like stunts, I guess, that were pretty poorly done, and you could point to like, well, Buster Keaton, you know, or whatever, like, you know, like these like people were doing stunts and making them look really cool at that same time. But you know, I don't expect that from everyone. in people that were making films these days. But.
Right, and that's the other thing that I find so interesting, because in the last episode we talked so much about Dracula and how there could have been so many cool moments to do special effects and everything, kind of like Nosferatu did.
Right.
And that's why, again, the other thing is that I feel like Frankenstein does all the special effects it needs to there. And, you know, again, whether it's well done or not to be determined, but you felt like they did the best they could, given the fact that it was 1931. So again, I feel like it's just heightened to an immense level there.
And I really do think most of the effects, I mean, stand up pretty well today,
No, they do. And one of the other things I have to like go on and on about is the makeup for especially the monster. Like just how they made it look like actual scars. Like he looks like he was stitched together piece by piece.
It looks like he has that like plate in his head, and
like, and it's just so well done and everything. And so Jack Pierce is the makeup effects artist who did it, and he was very, very prestigious there, and was pretty much the go-to guy for makeup for a long time. Unfortunately, he ended up kind of getting phased out, because it's one of those tales that even though makeup technology was advancing and there were quicker, different ways to do it, he was still kind of stuck in the old ways, so he kind of got phased out because of it there. But I mean, his work here just stands perfectly, and again, he really helps transform Boris Karloff into looking like something abnormal there. And I love that they especially made the intentional touch with the costuming of just keeping the jacket short there, because again, he is just like this, you know, monstrous being. He's not just like a regular human body. He's like all these body parts sewn together there, and so you're able to see the scars and again all that stuff, and it's it's really crazy. And another thing, I love the costumes. I think all the costumes are on point there. That's just another small thing, but especially I notice it with Frankenstein's monster. Just even though he's dressed in all black, I just feel like it just works so well for the character of the monster.
Yeah, especially because, like, I think pop culture, Frankenstein, I think he's wearing, like, purple and with torn up things or something. I don't know where that came from. And then he's all green and, like, you know. But, yeah, he's wearing, like, a pretty simple, common dress that it looks like he was dug up in that outfit, you know what I mean? And, I think it works really well, too.
Yeah, and again, it just, you know, it's just whenever I view this film, there's just so many things that I'm just like, oh, that's really good. Oh, that's really good. Oh, that's really good there. And of course, there's things that you can definitely nitpick at there. I think there's always something you can nitpick at. It just kind of is up to you as the viewer on how much that impacts you and your viewing experience. But like, I love the fact that, again, we get to see, you know, Henry Frankenstein in, you know, his mad scientist outfit, and again, it's more like a surgeon gown than anything there, as opposed to kind of kooky mad scientist, you know, Party City outfit that you see a lot of the time there. You just see him like that, but he still looks crazy and manic. And again, you know, they added bags underneath his eyes to make him really look like he's just has deprived himself of any nutrition just because he's been so focused on his work there. And then later on, you know, once he kind of has to like calm down, you see him look a lot more healthy, and he's dressed up nicely and everything, and has a different demeanor again, which I feel like I'm dissecting everything before getting to spoilers there, but there's just a lot to admire with this film, I believe. Any other points you wanted to hit on? The only thing I would probably hit on is I feel like the music, even though it's very sparse, it's done pretty good, because you hear, like, you know, the intro music, outro music, and the festival music there. You know, it's good.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things that's sort of, largely blend in with the environment when it's there at all, and so it's not like, I feel like it does a good job, but at the same time, I couldn't tell you what like the Frankenstein theme was off the top of my head, which I don't think you need to, you know, for a film like this. It's really more environmental, ambient kind of, I was just thinking about like the old Marvel movies before like you could think of the Avengers theme now, but way
Yeah.
before the Avengers came out, like all the Marvel movies that were coming out did not have any. You couldn't. They didn't have music you could recognize. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know they tried to do just the Iron Man song for Iron Man, but that was the only reason why you knew it, is because it was already a pre-established song.
Right. So like all the orchestral music that they pumped into those things, it just gave it no identity, and they kind of learned their lesson and was like, oh, now here's an identifier. So now whenever you hear, like it gives you like a mood or whatever, and you're like, oh, okay. I don't think Frankenstein needs that, but that's just what it reminded me of.
Yep, and I've seen it quite a bit that I do recognize the theme, but I also know exactly where you're coming from there, where it doesn't stand out quite as strong as, say, like Dracula or even Young Frankenstein.
Yeah.
There, but that's like no big detriment to it. It's just one of those things that, again, if you watched it a couple more times, you might pick up on it a little bit more there, but I totally understand where you're coming from. But yeah, I mean, if you don't got anything else, we can talk about ratings.
Yeah, we can rate it.
Okay.
Yeah, I give this movie a dark and spooky 9. Yeah, I know. I really like this movie. I feel like it's executed really well. You've heard me already ramble and rave about like the depth and complexity that I think is there in the characters, the themes, just the lighting, the environments, everything. I felt like this was a really well crafted movie. I hesitate to give it a 10. I don't think it quite reaches perfection, even by 1930s standards, just because of little things like that, where it's like, well, I wouldn't feel in good conscience giving this a 10, because the stunts could be better. There are some effects that are cheesy. There's a little lull every now and then. But overall, I mean, yeah, those are just little nitpicks that shave some points off the top. But overall, I mean, I felt like this was a really, really, really well-crafted movie, even beyond its source material. Because, yeah, Frankenstein is a really good book, obviously. It's a classic that's been in our present front and center in our literary education for a long time. But obviously it kind of steers away from the original source material pretty dramatically, from what I understand. Again, I haven't read it, but I know enough about the plot of the book to know that that's not how this and this happened, but still, a really good interpretation with characters like, I mean, I love Fritz, and he didn't even exist at all, and I feel like that completely changes the reason things happen, and makes for a really good tale. So I have a lot of praise for this film. Yeah, it's a 9 out of 10 for me.
I think that's a totally fair rating. And again, watching it again, I had previously also rated it a 9, but after watching it this time and just really taking in, again, all of the previous rewatches I did, for me, this film, as you could probably imagine, it's a near 10. It's like right on the precipice there. I don't think, like, because again, that's the other thing, again, I talk about is like, I noticed a lot of the weaker points there, and so it's like one of those things I'm like, can I really rate it a 10 there? Again, because it's like, enjoyment wise, obviously 10, but critical wise, it's like right 9.5, like super close to a 10. It's just, I don't think, again, like perhaps maybe over time and stuff, I might just be like, oh, what the hey, 10 out of 10 there. But like, it's right, hell, I could give it like a 9.9 even. I don't think it quite reaches the Shining level to where I feel like the Shining is just its own thing there, and I just feel like it's just untouchable there, but it gets really close. It's super close, and so like if I was to rate it 10 out of 10, I'd be comfy with it there, but realistically just like 9.5 split the difference there. I just think it's a strong film, and again, for a film that's like, over 90 years old, for it to hold up this well still in almost every aspect is just a feat on its own. And just, again, how provocative and, just engrossing this tale is, I think, is a major accomplishment James Whale was able to grab. So, that'd be my rating too. So, we both highly recommend it. So, please, if you have not ever seen Frankenstein, please, I encourage you to stop listening. This is probably the first time I'm like, no, please stop listening. Go watch the movie. But I mean, obviously, if you don't care about spoilers, then I warned you. I warned you.
I warned you. This is a reference to the beginning of the movie. Whenever he says, "I warned you."
Yes. Yeah. See, you got on. You got on here. See. So we're going to be talking about spoilers. So why don't you have the first opportunity to dissect this first spoiler here?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I do think it's interesting. I think the biggest spoiler probably is the end. How it ends is he gets burnt to death in a windmill. And then the monster does, which I think is just, poetic and awesome. And then, Victor in this one, Henry Frankenstein survives his fall and is like in bed, and then they have like a weird scene with the Baron and the wine, and that was I couldn't quite mention that in the not spoilers part, but the way it ends sucks. So like that's my most number one thing that knocked off a full point for me. But
you know what? I completely understand, and James Whale understands, because he did not want to end the film that way.
Really?
Yeah, studio interfered with him because initially, again, spoilers were in spoilers, he wanted Henry to die.
That's the ending I was going to pitch. That would have been a lot better. If Henry died there with his monster, it would have made so much more sense.
Yeah, but the studio was like, no, we're not going to let you kill him. We need a happy ending there.
Fuck
and
studios.
then plus, sequel potential.
Yeah, that's so stupid.
Yeah, so that's one of the things, because James Whale did want to kill Henry there, which I think, because, all right, this is also spoilers for the book, because you already know how the book ends there, because also in the book, Victor dies.
Right.
There. And so that it's one of those things that I feel like in the book it's done well. Here, I think like it's fine. I feel uncertain of how I would feel if they would end with him dying. I feel like it would be kind of poetic there, because he goes down with his creation. It's like the ending that would have made sense with the film as well. So I can tell that that's what James Whale wanted to do, because I mean, Elizabeth even has this foreboding sense of like something's wrong, and is when the monster escapes or whatever, and she's like, and she's worried specifically about Henry's life, like he's going to die, and he's like, nonsense, and he locks her in that room, and then you get the dramatic tension of like, well, the monster gets in the room with her and locked, which is an awesome scene. And like she's the one whose life is threatened all of a sudden, so you think that's how it's going to go. She ends up being fine, and then Henry ends up being like one-on-one with the monster at the end of the movie, and you're like, this is what she was worried about. He's going to die here, and it would have just put a perfect little bow on it if he did. But I think like if the film had ended with him dying, I would be fine. Because again, it is a bit of a sappy ending there, because it shows like all the maids being like, Baron Frankenstein, we brought his great grandmother's wine to drink, and he's like,
He won't be drinking that to the house of Frankenstein.
Yeah. Which is just a stupid way to end it, because it's like the whole movie was like moody and grappling with these themes and everything, and then the end is just like, well, he's fine, and it's like they just put in a whole scene to tell you it's fine. You know what I mean? It didn't feel like a true resolution. It did feel like a Band-Aid. Like, we're not going to show somebody dying on film. That's the main character. That would be a sad ending. So it's happy, guys. Go home happy.
Yeah.
And it just kind of betrayed the initial feeling of the film. Like, I don't think it ruined the film for me by any stance. It was just, I just felt like it was a poor ending. Literally just that last scene, because I feel like the windmill and everything else was great.
Yes.
It's just literally that last scene that I was like, that was kind of just like a sudden dip,
Yeah. If I was to play, like, I'm the director of this film, if I was to keep Henry alive, I would at least show at the end there where it's just like, is he okay? He's like, he's still breathing. We need to get him to a hospital there. And then end with, like, the windmill burning, fade to black there. Just something with that, because I feel like that is such a climactic high, because the tensions are high, the mob is there, the windmill's on fire, everything's going crazy, and then you just kind of mitigate all that by just having a regular scene with the maids, and then, his dad. It just feels like it just kind of sucks all of the tension and just the oh my gosh, what did I just watch?
No, I think I think a perfect way to keep him alive for sequels and whatever, and not betray the otherwise integrity of the film is for him to like maybe wake up just enough to say some fucking philosophical dumb quote. You could say part of that Milton quote in the beginning of the novel, and it would be perfect or whatever. He could just like say some that acknowledges that he made a mistake creating something, or that he sees himself in there. There's a million things you could write that would be interesting, and it just would give a last punch to the end of the film and the audience something to go home and think about.
Yeah, so I agree with you in the fact that I do think the ending is weak, and that's one of the many chips I would say that I see in this flawless statue of a film.
Right.
There, that's why that kind of keeps me from going like, here's a 10. I can't, you know.
I
so
can't with
I just feel like the struggle in between there, but I'm willing to give it the 0.5 at the very least there. But yes, I would highly agree with you that that final scene just sucks all of the tension out, which I'm sure was, you know, James Whale had to do it because they're like, studio's like, no, we really need the audience to be okay there. And I feel like, I'm not sure if like by him making that sacrifice, that's why he was able to do as many things as he was throughout the film, possibly, but either way, it definitely does suck. And I'm just glad that I was able to provide that trivia research that, don't worry, James Whale was also unhappy with their, and he also didn't want any sequels from this film. That's why he's like,
it doesn't make sense for there to be a sequel either, but
yeah, which you know, perhaps in the future we can view some of the sequels later on there, but you know, to be determined, of course. But yeah, I think that's definitely one of the strong things we can talk about is just that ending. But I do kind of want to talk about the stuff that leads up to the windmill there. Because I'll go ahead and talk about Fritz, because that's one of the things I find interesting is the fact that you don't feel like he has any sort of malice towards Henry there. Like he's just willing to do whatever there and go through. But again, you're not the viewer is not given a lot of directly delivered information about Fritz, but there's a lot of inferring you can do whenever it comes to Fritz. Because again, if you look at it at a surface level, you know, whenever the creature's created, you just see Fritz being an asshole to the monster there, and it, you know, they don't explain like, oh, he just feels inferior or you know. But I feel like it's very important, it's very interesting to see how much you can infer through that, because I was thinking there, because that was the thing, like whenever I watched it through the first time, I'm just like, man, he's just kind of being a jerk for no reason. But if you just start to kind of maybe perhaps see his point of view, because again, Fritz is, you know, hunchbacked, deformed. He still gets around pretty well, but definitely would be seen, especially at the time, as a lesser human being there.
Right. And he's also kind of like probably seeing himself a little bit in the monster, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because he's probably been considered monstrous by some for being hunchbacked and weird looking.
And again, he could also hate that, but he could, you know, also just feel superior, because again, he's like higher on the picking order there, because he's like, you're just a stupid monster, like a stupid animal. Because again, a lot of times whenever, you know, these people are horribly deformed, or heck, they don't even have to be deformed, they could just be messed up in the head, but they just pick on others just if they feel like they're powerless. I mean, we saw that with like Henry Bowers in the It film there, where, you know, again, he's so subservient and following, and again, you don't feel like he's ever treated disrespectfully by Henry, but you know the only reason Henry chose him is because nobody else would help him with these awful experiments there. And so I think him being bad does give insight as to his character potentially, but it also sets the creature on an important path, because again, whenever the creature is first brought to life there, you do see that Henry, which he's very strict and deliberate there with his work there, tries to calmly talk to him and try to like nurture him. He's like, come to me, sit down, and he doesn't say it with like, you know, I'm your master, sit. He's just trying to help learn, And so he does get a little bit of that nurturing side there, but he also gets a lot of the like hate and harsh reality that humanity has. Because again, the whole big question, especially that you get from the book there, is like, is he the monster or is humanity the monster?
Right.
There. So I think that also just serves as a good point because again, Frankenstein, whenever he does these actions there, he does it a lot of times because he's confused, scared, and just doesn't understand. Because they also, and this is kind of makes me curious about it, is the fact that, whenever Fritz goes into the academy to take the brain, he takes the normal brain and drops it.
Right.
But then he takes the abnormal brain. So it makes me curious on how much that abnormality affected.
Right. And there's not only the question of that, but how much, Dr. Frankenstein and the other professor think that it affects the monster, right? Because that's sort of a pivotal point, too, where he says, like, it's a perfectly normal brain, I stole it from your institution. This is after they make the monster and he's alive and he, and then the doctor says, well, the brain that was stolen from our college was that of a criminal. And you could see, like, it hit Dr. Frankenstein's face turn, and he's like, well, it's just a bunch of tissue. It shouldn't matter. You know what I mean? But I think that's the crucial point where he stops seeing Frankenstein as, like a blank slate that could be made good. And instead he's like, oh, there might be a fatal flaw in this. And then, maybe he starts treating him differently after that.
Holy cow, you're starting to inch it up to a 9.75 for me thinking about it. I'm just like, there's just so many good intricacies to that. Because again, it does cause a bit of self-doubt because he's like, nonsense, I've created the perfect human being. He even revels on how perfect it is.
Right. He's like, I did such a great job. And then he's like, well, there's a little flaw in your plan. And he's like, oh, shit. And that just coincides, it layers perfectly on top of, well, yes, Frankenstein's monster is now learning about the world, and his teacher is Fritz. You know what I mean? Fritz is teaching him that it's a cruel world full of fire and whips and trauma. You know what I mean? And that you have to defend yourself. Whereas previously, when you see him hold his hands up to the light, and then later you see him get encountered by, the symbol of innocence, Maria, showing him, about flowers and stuff, and you see that he's a nice guy. He's loving and caring. And he responds to what is given to him. And really, Maria's death is an accident. And that's what sets him off on the rampage through the countrysides, is people, attacking him for being a murderer. But
yeah, and that's also just a great scene. And again, it's silly, but it's also very traumatic as well there. So I think,
it's a real of mice and men, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely of mice and men tone for sure whenever it comes to it. So I think it definitely has major, it's just a wonderful, beautiful scene there. And I'm going to try to keep from skipping around because there's like, oh yeah, there's also that good scene.
Right.
But one of the other interesting things that I love that Boris did is whenever he's staring at the sun, because, Henry is trying to show how he reacts to light and everything, that he starts to almost get angry and like shaking his fist there. He's like, oh, close the window, close the window, close the window.
Right.
There.
Because he's been kept in the dark for days, like literally in the dark.
I just think it's great. And I do think that, again, Fritz kind of just being kind of cruel, and again, him dying, that Henry is torn about it because he doesn't immediately view it as like, oh, you're a monster. He's just saying, well, yeah, Fritz was kind of acting like a jerkwad towards him, so it's kind of not surprising, but also at the same point, we can't have him going around killing people.
Right.
And so whenever, again, the other people step in, they're trying to subdue him and tranquilize him, which again, just adds more of that confusion of just like, okay, they're trying to stop me, they're trying to hurt me.
Right.
Again, as well, because you don't get a lot of that nurturing moments there that help kind of.
And I think one of the great contexts, because they added in this Fritz character for this movie, which is in the 1930s, and this is actually an important time in psychology. I mean, a little bit afterwards, but I feel like this is still part of the conversation now, where like Freud, like Sigmund Freud was really popular, and like and the concepts of nature and nurture. I mean, Freud was pretty groundbreaking in like as like things that happen to you as babies, like affects how you act now, which was not something that was previously explored. Now we know all kinds about, we have terms like ACEs and PACEs and traumatic childhood experiences, ACEs being adverse childhood experiences. and how those affect psychology today. And that's still, a lot of things that we're exploring now. But like that was pretty groundbreaking at the time, to think that the nature versus nurture debate, and really, I mean, the nature versus nurture debate was also present during Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein, because, I mean, with Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were arguing about it. I can't remember which one's which, but one of them said, like, I think it was Benjamin Franklin, was like, give me a baby, any baby from a poor family, and let me raise it, and it will be a doctor. And Thomas Jefferson was like, no, poor people are stupid, and then whenever they grow up, they could not ever possibly be a doctor. The reason that we're successful is because we have good genes, or whatever.
That's also the plot of Trading Places.
It's also the plot of the eugenics movement, which was also popular in the 1920s in America. Actually, it was really popular up until about the 40s, whenever Germany went a little too far about it. Which funny that this takes place in Germany. Like, really, I mean, seriously, the Nazi movement was happening now whenever this movie came out in the 30s, and it was based on American eugenics, which was popular at the time of this movie and for decades before, which was, the idea that some people are just born dumb, and and they shouldn't be allowed to reproduce, and it just so happens those people are minorities, And so, like, that was really a lot of popular thought in the day. And that, obviously they don't use any of those terms. They're not talking about psychology in this movie. But those themes are present because, I mean, this monster is a blank slate, it's a new brain. And they show through Fritz's actions that whenever you feed this, when you nurture this with evil, its nature is not evil, they show, but you can nurture it into being a monster. And that's sort of what happens in this movie, and I do wonder how much of that was influenced by those popular scientific and pseudoscientific thoughts at the time.
If it's any food for thought, I probably would say that it was probably influenced, because especially with the Wolfman, especially, that also harkens to a lot of the stuff that was going on in Europe during that time period, especially whenever it came to conflicts, controversies there. So I definitely would not be surprised if that took a major factor into it there. Right. But yeah, and so it's really interesting, again, just to kind of see, Frankenstein kill people, actually kill people. So again, it's not even like, he's purely innocent, because they could have easily done that, as well as like, oh no, it's a big misunderstanding. And it's really just kind of a little bit of both, because like the fact that you see that he hung Fritz is very shocking, because you see the body, it's not even off screen, a silhouette, you see the body hanging there,
which is also a fun callback to, I mean, Frankenstein's body is largely from a hanged man, you know what I mean? Like, this is something that might be in his nature to know, like, somewhere deep in the vibes of his body, still zapping around in the electricity is the knowledge of how to hang someone. But
and that comes as a question, like, is that just the abnormality, or does it just come from the primal state there, where it's fight or flight? So I think that's kind of the interesting thing, again, where you could kind of confer, like, how much is this of Frankenstein's, if he has any malice, or if he's just purely innocent. It's really hard to tell, and I think that's just what makes for a good story. It's just all gray matter,
right?
Nothing's black and white, even though the film is
gray matter.
Yes,
green. That's a good one.
Thank you for catching on. But yeah, and I love how they set it up, because it's clearly a question of, how do we get the monster out of his imprisonment there and believable. And while I feel like Dracula did feel like stuff is like, okay, I get it, but couldn't you have written it a different way perhaps there? This one I feel like is completely sound, because it's them struggling to keep this body down, because he's going bananas, trying to like just attack everybody there. But the interesting thing, he really only ever directly kind of tries to kill Fritz, because he knows that Fritz is causing him harm, whereas the other ones, he does try to wrestle them, but it's never immediately like go for the kill there. And so while this is all going on, Henry's dad is coming up. He's like, I'm finding out what my son's doing. I don't know why I'm Southern in Germany, but he does not sound Southern in the film. Mind you, this is just my own Oklahoman coming out. But going up there and dealing with it, and again, he's like, my dad can't know about this. Nobody else can know about it. And everyone was like, I completely understand there. And man, I hate jumping back, but I have to hit this point. Another thing I love about the creation scene is the fact that it's not just Henry and Fritz there, that he does have an audience there of people that are doubting him. And he's just like, well, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see who's crazy, and he's just fully confident. I just love that they have that. And I love that they also understand that, people can't know about this. Right. This is really messed up. And they care about his well-being. And so whenever they help get rid of the body there, that the doctor is just like, I'll take care of him. You go upstairs and entertain, your father and your fiance. And then you just all of a sudden see Henry just collapse just from exhaustion and everything. It just hits them all at once there. And then they're like, no, you need to get out of here. We're going to get you better and you need to get married. These experiments are unhealthy for you.
Right.
And, they pull him away. And that's whenever, the doctor is like, oh, don't worry. I'll take care of it and I'll make sure everything's cleaned up. Yeah. And so that's completely believable in that sense. And it's also believable in the fact that, again, as the doctor, he's going to strategically, dissect it there and just to go straight for the kill there. It also makes sense because they talk about whenever they I was about to say neutralize, but it sounds like death. But whenever
tranquilize him,
sedative.
Yeah. Sedate him.
Yeah, sedate him. That's the word I'm looking for. Holy cow! And sedative is a line from Young Frankenstein. 2 words. Sedative.
Sedative?
Whenever they sedate him, they're like, oh yeah, this is a really strong thing. He's going to be out for a long time. And of course, he happens to wake up from the anesthesia or whatever. And again, he's getting dissected on. You don't really see how much he's doing, but the monster knows okay, I'm taking you out because you're trying to hurt me.
Right.
And he kills the doctor right there. And again, it's pretty graphic, not in the sense that you see any gore or anything, but just, again, it's just silence and you hear,
Right. It's it's one of the stronger horror elements in this film, I think, to have somebody that you think is dead and then he wakes up and hand on the back of your neck. I mean, it's it's one of those things where, the Frankenstein's monster is not really like a killer, Jason or Michael or whatever.
Yeah.
But he in that moment, he jump scares him and kills him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the other thing I love is whenever you see him lumber around the monster, you could see his muscle strands all throughout his arm. So he looks like he could choke you out like nobody's business.
Right.
And I love his fighting style that he has going on. Not that it's karate, kung fu, martial arts, but just he'll sometimes cup his hands together to use as a heavy club.
Yeah.
There and again go for a choke. Again, just very primal stuff.
Right.
There. And so I think that's just so well done. And I do really love that the film does have a bit of a lull whenever it comes to the marriage and wedding, because it kind of allows more of the humanity to be shown in Henry, because you do see that he does love Elizabeth at the beginning of the film. He's just like, don't worry, honey, I'm almost done with this, there, but you still see the manic in his eyes, as opposed to him being calm, and he's like, oh, I'm so happy we're getting married. And it's just, you get to see the wedding there. It is a bit of a slower part, but for me, I actually kind of enjoy that slower part whenever it does, because again, that first third of the film is pretty intense with how much stuff happens. So then you have a little bit of a break there and kind of get to see what his normal life was.
Right. And it's also one of those things where you kind of know something bad's coming. Because it's not too far, after he leaves, that they show the scene where the doctor's working on him and he gets choked out and killed, and so you know that it's just a matter of time before Frankenstein makes it into the town, and you start to see the scenes like the Maria scene and everything, until they finally, the town becomes aware of the monster as a whole, and they all go to hunt him down. But like, so it's coming, so that kind of makes him like enjoying his life and like, this is wonderful, kind of be a little more less slow, because you're like, all right, but it's all gonna come crashing down.
Yes, absolutely. And it's also during this time whenever we get that really well done scene overall with Maria and her dad, who's like leaving. It's like, okay, you have fun playing with that kid, and now they're and again, she's out playing by the water, and then instinctively whenever you see the monster arrive, you think like, oh my gosh, this girl is going to be like killed by him. But again, it kind of subverts your expectation there, because again, she greets him with such a warmness and kindness there, and he's just kind of processing it, because he's never met any individual that's been this sickeningly sweet to them, because even with Henry kind of being more nurturing, he also did it kind of as a scientist there, as opposed to just like someone who loves his creation there. And so you get like this really sweet moment, and again, like, he's still processing stuff. Like, I don't know how long he's been alive, but you see like the gears turning his head, and you actually just get to see him smile there whenever he gets again, like, really enjoy the smaller things in life, because she's like, here, let's make boats with flowers, and like tossing it, and then he tosses the flowers that she gave her, and again, he's smiling, having fun, and so he's thinking, oh, throwing stuff in water is fun, thus leading him to toss Maria into the water, and she's like, no, you're hurting me, and then just plops in the water, which again, it's comedic, but also if you take it to the sense that she couldn't swim and drowned, it's horrifying at the same time.
And it's just, it's one of those things that's a horrible accident, but it's also just like, just an awesome sort of audience experience to see, like, these are the two examples of innocence in the story, you know what I mean? Because like, he's an innocent blank slate at that point. He's obviously been traumatized up until this point, and so you wonder how he's going to react to this thing, but then you see how he reacts to love for the first time, and he's like, oh, this is nice, you know what I mean? And she's innocent because she sees this giant lumbering murderous monster, and it's just like, you want to play, you know what I mean? They both there don't understand the consequences of the world, and it's really just a terrible accident that leads to the remainder of the story.
And I do like that, and it makes me kind of curious to see how the gears in his head turn, because again, whenever he tosses her in, he all of a sudden just starts to panic and worry.
He's like, oh, bad thing happened, I didn't mean that.
And and probably again, like, maybe he just realizes that she just died there somehow, and it just kind of makes it kind of again question like whether she drowned or she was killed before drowning there, because you just hear, help, you're hurting me.
I think she was drowned, because because the father kind of parades her through the streets later.
That's one hell of a scene as well. Just like a father bringing his dead daughter through the city, seeing the distraught on his face is such a strong scene.
And through a festival, nonetheless, where people are celebrating, it turns from celebrating to like an angry mob, you know what I mean?
And I feel like that's also a well done transition, because it's like, how do you take a celebrating village and turn them into an angry mob? Seeing a dead child.
It was a whole they turned into like a depressed crowd and then into an angry mob. You see the whole mood swing with the entire crowd, which is awesome.
And again, you hear him, again whenever he brings it in, and he's like, my daughter, she drowned. He's like, I'm really sorry, but why'd you bring the body? It's like, she was murdered. And so then everyone's like, oh my god, there's a child murderer there. And then of course, they're a very tight-knit, town, and so then they unite under each other, and then they kind of realize, because at the same time, this is whenever you mentioned earlier, Elizabeth like kind of gives the forewarning to Henry, like, I have a really bad feeling, I don't know what's going to happen, and again, he's just like, oh, everything's fine. And then Victor comes up and says, hey, Henry, I got to talk to you real quick. And he's like, Elizabeth, stay right there. And, you know, he closes the door and he's like, hey, the doctor was just found dead. And he's like, oh my God. And then
shit.
they hear the, and it's like, oh my God, it sounds like he's upstairs. I'm going to lock the door so that way Elizabeth is safe. And so I feel like it's just well done writing there, because they easily could have just done it differently there. But you see, like, okay, how do we make sure the monster is about to attack Elizabeth and nobody's there to able to help save her? Because again, Henry is frantically looking upstairs. He's like, oh, well, maybe he's downstairs. Then he hears Elizabeth scream. He's like, oh my God, Elizabeth. And everyone's trying to get the door. And so he's the one that's able to break in, which I will... Another unintentional goofy moment there is, again, whenever the monster arrives and, you know, Elizabeth sees her the first time and she does like that shock scream and he goes, like almost like a growl there. It's just...
Well, I do wonder if that was intentional.
Oh my God.
No, this might be messed up, but because of all the other subtle layers of things they put in, I mean, there's kind of like a literary history of like, and this is, I know this is triggering, I guess, but sexual assault of a woman on their wedding day. And like when he comes in, like you don't see the attack and you like see her on the bed. So like,
I saw that and I was like, he didn't do it. Which,
if they were implying that, that's probably the limit at which they could imply it in a film in 1930s. But so I don't know what to make. I just, for my own conscience, choose to believe that he didn't.
That's me too. That's me too, Aaron. I'm just thinking. I'm like, no. Like he just scared her, and he got scared. I'm choosing that. But then again, like they do have that scene in Young Frankenstein that has not aged very well.
That is
there. So there is also that. So there could be that implied thing. I might unfortunately have to look at IMDb, see if my image of Frankenstein is ruined. You know, like I am not. I am not representing a assaulter like that whatsoever. But yeah, it is very kind of perturbing because it is kept very vague, because you just see Elizabeth being like, oh, monster, ooh. Okay, all Wikipedia says, monster enters Elizabeth's room, causing her to scream. When the searchers arrive, they find Elizabeth unconscious. The monster has escaped. So it's even vague.
Here's what Cliff Notes says about the book.
Uh-oh.
While Victor is prowling the halls of the inn where the couple was living, the monster makes good on his threat to Victor, enters their bedroom, and strangles Elizabeth.
So maybe it could be allusion to that, perhaps, there. Again, it's just... But, no, I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I think your thoughts are valid. So, again, I think it's just... It could be up to audience interpretation. I like Aaron mentioned, I think we both just kind of pray and assume that he did not do anything awful to Elizabeth, but instead just scared her to where she just basically fainted, I think. Because again, it is also kind of hinted at that the monster himself, you know, doesn't usually try to go attacking people unless he's provoked, and Elizabeth was kind of scared, screaming there. But he did try to chase her, so there's that very vague line as to what happened. I don't know if you found anything else in your research.
No, I mean, there are a lot of stuff that was book specific, but there's obviously two different kind of lines there. But even in the book, it doesn't seem to, because she is also attacked on her wedding night in the book, but it does not. There's an omission of any sexual details in the book as well.
Yeah. So I would prefer to keep it that way, but obviously, if you think it happened the other way, I can understand completely why.
And some of that vaguely might be intentional too, to be like, oh, maybe that, maybe not. You know?
Yeah, for sure, and that also could just further antagonize it, because again, that's what kind of. Like, Henry, throughout this whole thing, is having to come to terms that the one thing he wanted to succeed in life, he now has to destroy. Which is hard, but he does it so believably. He does it step by step there. Because at first he's like, no, he's perfect, he's great. He's like, well, I mean, he has little flaws. Okay, he's killing people, but he antagonized. Okay, well, he killed a girl. Attacked my fiance, yeah, okay, we gotta get rid of him there. And so I do like that he does come to his own senses there and just being like, I feel like I have to get rid of him. But it's also at this, so you understand his point of view, but you also understand that the monster is not completely at fault per se. Like, it's just misunderstanding, again, just being new to life and everything. And it does lead to a very impressive mob scene. The mob scene is definitely well done. And again, just marching through that village there, again, I can't help but think, even Beauty and the Beast, whenever they have the mob, took some inspiration from this.
I was just thinking, one of the more pivotal, unfortunately, movies in Hollywood history with mob scene is, I'm sure audiences at the time are like, wow, I haven't seen a mob scene this good since Birth of a Nation.
Oh my god. Oh, that was a good one, man. That was a good one. Very important film. Very, very, very troubling film.
Important film, terrible subject matter.
Yes, exactly.
It's propaganda, but I mean, propaganda is a very prominent part of film history and film current. So I mean, whatever. But
yeah. That's our thoughts on Birth of a Nation. Stay tuned for the episode to release never.
Well, that's probably a horror movie by today's
standards.
So.
Yeah, exactly. So perhaps. Yeah, and so that leads to this big chase scene, which again, this does lull a little bit surprisingly, because again, it does focus on the big mob shots, but there's also a lot of impressive shots they do, like the swooping shot there and everything.
There's one they must have filmed it from some high up view where you could see just the mass crowd, like all the torches in the crowd, and I was like, wow, I didn't know they were doing helicopter shots in the 30s. It obviously wasn't, but that's what it looked like.
I know that's why they applaud Citizen Kane, is for the implements of new camera techniques and everything. But I was surprised to see them do a lot more with this camera than just kind of, like you mentioned in Dracula, it's just regular setups, just look at everything there. And so it is a very impressive mob scene. It does linger on for quite a bit there. And again, there's no music to hype it up there. It's just mostly just
a lot of yelling.
Mobs yelling, going, and they're like, you go this way, I'll go this way, you go this way. And so you believe that Henry would want to team up, because again, he's like, I need to find this creation, destroy it. I know what we're going up against. They don't.
He's
and
like,
he doesn't want to give it away that he created this thing either. So he's like, yeah, let's get whoever this thing is, even though I know what it is. And so whenever they go through, I do also love that, out of all the settings, that it was in the mountains there. Because again, a lot of this will play into it, but you talk about the opening entry they had for the novel Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus there. And so again, I do love that they chose to do it at this rock formation there, and them going through, and again, whenever they're looking through, they're going place to place, and you see the monster, going, rawr, rawr, they're just clearly upset. But I do love the moment that whenever Henry is separate from the group because they split off, that he finds the monster looks at him, and they just kind of stare eye to eye, because they just both realize, that if they don't take the other one out, problems are going to keep happening.
And there's another one of those big moments. I love that whenever they finally, he gets chased into the windmill again, and he carries Henry with him, and then Henry kind of wakes up, and they do this thing where they're rotating around in the cogs of the windmill.
It's such a good scene.
And they're looking at each other through these frames that are caused by the windmill, and they both see each other in each other for a minute, you know what I mean, before they realize they have to go back to killing each other.
I just think that's such a strong thing, because they easily could have just written it in a way that either makes the monster too sympathetic or too monstrous there. But I feel like they toil on that fine line, because even whenever they fight and everything, surprise to no one, the monster is able to knock Henry unconscious there, because when it comes to fisticuffs, you're gonna lose typically. But his instinct isn't immediately kill, it's instead grab Henry, and then whenever he's being chased by the mob, he runs to the windmill, because again, it's their safety. And again, because he could have easily killed him, he obviously has killed a person before there, but instead his instinct is just to go unconscious, because again, it is, I mean, it could be, does he view him as his creator?
Right, as
There.
his father of sorts, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's just a very interesting dynamic. And so again, you see them dragged, and again, the mob's chasing them to the windmill. And again, like that whole scene whenever Henry starts to wake up, and again, all you see the monster doing is just like, you know, trying to like shoo the mob to go away. Like that's his response to everything. He doesn't like, whether it's fire, and there's lots of fire with the mob, and so he's just swiping at it. They're like, you know, go away, yeah, shoo,
Right.
you know, there. And so whenever Henry starts to wake up again, he almost doesn't even want to try to fight it. He tries to crawl away, but the monster stops him from escaping. And again, they do go through those cogs, which I love that shot. Like I had like one of those like ooh moments there.
Right.
Like I audibly said that just because I'm like, that's such a good scene. Like such good stuff. Again, I know that Citizen Kane gets like applauded for being like the greatest film of all time with a lot of film techniques in use, but there's a lot of techniques that were used in films that were way before Citizen Kane. But
Right.
that's beside the point of me saying that Citizen Kane's a little overrated.
Just a little. Just a little.
Just a little, but besides the point there, yeah, it's such a good scene there, and I do love that, you know, Henry is able to kind of make a mad dash for like the entryway, and again, he's being held back. The monster's doing everything it can just to hold him there, and you don't know if it's because I want to kill you or no, come back.
Right.
It is such clever writing.
I do love that this entire arc does. I know the movie doesn't reference this, but the opening book, just that quote from Paradise Lost. I mean, Paradise Lost is fundamentally about a creator creating a creature that rebels against him and attempts to overthrow him, right? You know, he creates Lucifer as his archangel, and Archangel tries to like overthrow him to take over heaven. That's what the whole story is about. That's mirrored here, where like the creator has created this monster that he realizes if he thought it was going to be creating life and something helpful and a breakthrough. And he talks about becoming God. I know what it feels like to be God because I made this thing, and then this thing rebels against him, and tries to overtake him. And they both know at the end that they have to take the other one out. It really is another fucking literary reflection there. But
No, I think it's definitely good to point out.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of mirroring in that sort of thing, and then to see him. Yeah, I mean, the where they're looking at each other through the cogs is like, he sees the monster as a man, and the man sees, and Frankenstein's monster sees Frankenstein as a monster. You know what I mean? So it's just an interesting like look in the mirror there. But
yeah, definitely interesting dynamic, and I love that they put it in the film there. You know, just to take that opportunity, because again, it feels like, you know. Again, it doesn't feel like they purposely went out of their way to do it. It feels like just something natural that would happen, and again, just allows that moment to really shine.
Right. And they could have easily omitted that moment, but it's like it just adds so much to put it right there before both of their fates are decided. But
Absolutely agree. And you have great moments like that, and then followed by one of the silliest moments, again, whenever Frankenstein is able to escape the grasp of the monster, and then you just see this very limpy body fall.
Well, he's kind of like thrown over a bit by the monster.
Yeah.
He this terrible rag doll hits the mill, the one of the mills of the windmill.
And he just hangs there a bit, and you see like the arms and legs twist as he falls. And again, it's just like, could they have not found a better mannequin or something at the time? But at the same point, it's such a quick they're gone just to explain kind of what happened. It's kind of like the bats in Dracula, like you know how it's done there. And even though it's goofy, you understand the point. It gets the point across. And again, does lead to the thing of just like... I don't think they even say if he's alive or not in that scene whenever they're just trying to check him.
Right. Which is why I thought, you know, maybe he dies. But...
And then, you know, that just leads the mob to just be like, okay, well, the creature's trapped. We'll burn the windmill down. You know, that he won't be able to escape that.
Especially to them, because the mob doesn't really realize that this is like where he was created, or really what Frankenstein is. They're just calling him the murderer, you know?
Yeah. And so,
I think it's not really poetic, like this is where he was created and now this is where he dies. It's also like, remember that this is the place where all of these obsessive research happened, and even when he was getting carried away back to to be calm with Elizabeth, he was like, "Oh, my research is that," and the professor was like, "Don't worry, I'll document it all." But that professor dies, and so what's going up in flames is not only like this creature and it's the entire lab and all his research and just this forbidden knowledge that should have never surfaced in the first place. It's like God's retaking it, you know what I mean? It's like burning in flames.
9.8, baby, 9.8. We're slowly getting up to a 10. Slowly cranking it up to a 10. I think that's definitely really good. And I feel like it is very poetic also, the fact that he is being consumed by fire because, again, I'm mentioning this a 50th time, the tale of Prometheus, again, is the fact that he, brought fire to mankind, and because of that, he was punished and forced to suffer, which, again, I always imagine, like, the rock landscape there. But again, just also, you talk about, like, you're born by fire, dying by fire there. And so I feel like just for the creature to be surrounded by the flames, the one thing that he hates. And it's really traumatic, which is the weird thing you see. Because, again, comparing to Dracula, not that this should be a comparison, but I can't help but compare to, his death is off screen and you just hear, They focus on all of the terror of the monster because he's screaming. He's scared out of his mind because there's fire everywhere. He's like, I don't know what's going on, why fire is happening. Because, again, he doesn't really know anything about the world. He just sees this fire. And, again, he's just trying to figure out what to do. He doesn't know where to go because he's surrounded by the flames and the people there. And whenever he runs inside, he's trapped under one of the support beams. And you just see this windmill consumed in flames. It's just such a powerful image there and just really kind of horrifying in a sense. Because, again, this is a film whenever you're viewing like, oh, this is the monster. You won't feel bad that he's defeated. But I felt super bad watching him, just again, because you could just see the fear that Boris puts into this performance there, just screaming, just shrill, scared noises. And again, I think it is completely accurate in the fact that because they deliberately chose to, in the film, with the scene afterwards, it just took away all the intensity of that one scene that I wish would have just been kind of permeated. But again, I know sometimes I'm also kind of unsure about that because a lot of times you'll see films and you're like, yep, they're dead, the end, you know, sort of thing. So I would have at least, I think it definitely needed something to tamper off. I just feel like, it's like one of those things that we went to one extreme to another, as opposed to tampering it off a little bit there. Like even like dragging, Henry off there and just, again, him saying something poetic, be it Milton or philosophical. Because, again, the script is bomb. It's really strong, really good, really well done. It's just like major applause everywhere for that. But, I mean, I feel like this film, it's just super good. It's good. It's good.
It's good. It's good. I'll also note, not only is like, the Prometheus example with the fire and the windmill super important, but I just want to point out that what are they using for light but the torches? And so like it's really a continuation of the leitmotif from the beginning is all the fire, and he even shrieks at the light in the beginning, and then that's what he gets consumed by is the light.
9.85, baby. 9.85. We're slowly working our way up to a 10, boys and girls.
If it wasn't for that last scene.
If it wasn't for that last scene, just to blue balls us.
Yeah, that's really what that takes away the majority of the points. For me, but.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. But I mean, aside from that, any other points you want to hit up above Frankenstein?
No, man, I think we went through it.
I felt like we had a really good discussion there, and there was a lot to applaud and talk about with this film. So that's why, if you're still listening and you have not seen the film, even though you've heard kind of all the bullet points, it's definitely worth watching. Like, even if you're not into black and white films there, it just pretty much does so many dark, moody, dramatic stuff that I would be remiss to see people dislike it. And this is usually the film I show people, that aren't big fans of black and white films. Because again, it is something that it is a little bit of an acquired taste, I believe, there, if they're not used to it. But I've shown my parents this, I've shown my wife this, and they all love it, and so that's speaking like loudly on just how strong of a film it is, that even if it's older, black and white, that it's still entertaining this many years later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we'll be able to close the chapter on this book here. So it was really fun getting to dig into this film again. I was very surprised to see, like, you know, how much we were able to dissect with the Universal films. Not to say that there isn't a lot, but again, just podcast wise, since we've talked about a lot more modern films as compared to these films,
Right.
it's really cool just to kind of dissect it here. So definitely we'll probably visit some more Universal monster films in the future. However, with this next film that I'm going to tease for Aaron here, it's definitely going to harken more towards the wintry aspect of the season there. Definitely a snowy, icy film, to be sure. It is also a remake that was made in the 80s by a director which we've seen a couple of his films.
Okay.
And it also stars Kurt Russell. Let's see. And it's a very sussy movie.
Among Us?
It's close. In fact, Among Us actually took inspiration from probably this movie, which was a remake of a movie, which was an adaptation of a novel. There. Okay, no worries. We'll go ahead. It's a similar title to It, where it's just describing. And it's, let's see, and it starts with the, and it's. You got it. We're gonna watch the. No. Okay. Let's see.
The sus be Among Us.
Closer. You got the two first letters right. And
this.
You got close. There's an I afterwards. The
Thing.
Yeah, the thing. Okay, yeah. I didn't know how the hell else to do that. I was like, I don't know my grammatical terms.
You said it was like it, so I thought it was just like one word. So I was like, them, this.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I meant to say like it was just like the same.
Yeah.
Hell, you got the English terms.
I got you. It's all good.
Yeah, but that's what I was going for. Yeah, I can see why I horribly confused. You're like, well, what the crap is this?
Right.
Yeah.
It is a pronoun, but I figured you were thinking of like an article because you said these. I was like, this, them. I don't.
But yes, it is the thing. Okay. So thank you all so much for listening to this episode, and we'll see you all again next time when we're Poppin the Scary with John Carpenter's The Thing.
Whoa,
The Thing.
It's a thing.
I'm doing something with my brain. The Things. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're Poppin the Scary.